Don't worry, it's just a scary story. Yeah, what are you, a chicken? The two 13-year-old boys said, taunting Charlie. The latest transfer from San Antonio. Charlie was scared, but he didn't want to look like a chicken in front of the neighborhood kids. These were kids who would decide if he was okay or not. They would tell the other kids if he was cool or a big chicken. He just wanted to make new friends in the new place. He knew he didn't have enough if he didn't go in and shout, "Only broken bones, Pete. I have a bone for you to break." Or he would have lived the rest of his life in such, God knows how long he might be, being that he was only in the 8th grade. "Hell no, I'm not scared," growled Charlie, who was standing right in front of the old abandoned shack on a dirt lot. Its white paint had mostly chipped away, and the wood was old and ragged and hung from its original places here and there. There was no skirting at the base that it was built on its stilts. It was black as pitch underneath. At the top of the roof was made of rusted old tin, and the windows were all knocked out. It was more than just a shack, really. It was more of a tiny house. Regardless, it was obnoxious. Graffiti was sprayed in the dark green in front of the door reading, "Fuck you." A large yellow jacket's nest was alive and moving underneath the eave just right to the side of the porch. The foul odor of death emanated from the lot, likely a dead animal under the house, maybe more, judging potentially of the stench. It was a hot Texas day in August, which intensified the smell. If you were ever been in Texas during the month of August, then you'll have a pretty good idea of what the weather in hell is like. The sound of flies could be heard under the house. Charlie imagined maggots squirming around whatever dead carcasses living in the darkness. He was like a good ghost story and scary things, but it was a bit of a chicken when it came down to actually exploring them. What did I have to ask about town ghosts? He asked to himself. Okay, here it goes. The wary boy slowly crept up to the porch, noticing a silent, yet very still active, yellow jacket's nest. As he stepped onto the worn, withered boards at the porch floor, they let out a small creak. This house had been hundreds of years old. These boards could break at any minute. Charlie stalled, looking back at the boys. "Hey man, we've all done it. It's never happened to us," said Joey, the chubby kid. "He's just scared. Look, do you want to be known as Lido the chicken? No one will be hanging out at school if you don't go in. We'll tell everyone you flunked out," said Jason, the skinny, intense one. Joey Mayer was one of the two children that lived with their mother, father, and messed up grandfather. Joey's grandfather was released from prison 6 years ago for the indecency of the child, a neighborhood girl who just 9 years old down the street from his house in San Antonio. He was retired from Air Force and lived at home with his wife Brenda where the incident occurred. During this incarnation, Martha had overdosed on Vicodin. After his release, his son decided to allow him to live with him and his family to get far away from the city as they moved to Lytle when Joey was just a year old. Jason Prutt, on the other hand, was a bad seed, a black sheep of his family. He had 2 older sisters and 1 younger brother. He was the middle-class working family that he had no one to go out with. Jason's parents were always puzzled at how different he was compared to the rest of the family. Just a black cloud. Once he was just 5 years old. He was outside with his mother and their dog Bailey startled him by barking suddenly. Just as clear as day in front of his mother, he said, "What the fuck, Bailey?" Charlie scanned around the property for some sort of weapon, anything he could use to stab or cut anything inside, waiting to snatch him up and take him under the house and do God knows what to him. He was still living in this San Antonio a few months back. Charlie had earned $20 from doing all of his chores for the past 2 weeks and wanted to go to the mall right now. Down the street to blow all the arcade and S. Barrow's Pizza at the food court. After he made his way into the mall with his big sister Marie, they separated so she could meet up with her friends. Charlie made his way to the video arcade to play his favorite classic game, Street Fighter. While playing, a middle-aged man made his way over to Charlie and watched him play. When Charlie looked back at him, you could see the man reach into his jacket pocket, pulled out a magazine, and glanced at it for a moment before putting it back in his coat pocket. Immediately, Charlie became uneasy, but kept playing this game until he was on a roll. It was an intense match against Saget, a final boss of the original game. The man introduced himself to Charlie and began to ask him questions. Things like, what is your name? How old are you? Where do you go to school? What is your favorite character in this game? The man was middle-aged, balding Hispanic, wore glasses, had a thick Mexican accent. By now, Charlie was so sure this creepy guy's intentions were clear. He meant to do harm to him. Charlie decided to purposely lose his game, walk away to report this guy to someone who worked at the mall. Just then the biggest man he's ever seen walked up to them. He looked to be about 6'7" Glenn Danzig. He had to be a bodybuilder. Right when Charlie felt queasy, and the middle-aged Mexican man introduced Charlie to his Godzilla. As the huge man extended briefly his hand over for Charlie's sake, Charlie spotted the game room attendant and quickly walked over to him and told him what had just happened. Totally bypassing Godzilla's huge extended hand and seeing that Charlie was doing, the two men quickly disappeared out of the fire exit. That wasn't until the first time he had been nearly abducted. Charlie's parents felt that it was time they moved away from the city and to a smaller, knit community. After all, Charlie was beginning to grow a very handsome boy. His dad had taught him anything that could be used as a weapon. He also taught him to trust his gut. Come on, Charlie, don't check it out now. He spotted an old plank of plywood, just pointed at the end that could be used as a stabbing tool. If it's better than nothing, he muttered to himself as he walked back down the steps to retrieve the shank. Okay, so if we do this, we're cool? He asked Jason. Yeah, they said in a high pitch. We'll tell everyone you're cool. You can even met Joey's older sister, Tara. She's hot. Aw, fuck you, Jason. That's my sister, Joey shouted defensively. Jason just laughed and stuck out his tongue at Joey. Charlie said, using one cool line he's seen many times in movies, as he walked up to the decay floor. Bring it on. He opened the door. The true stench hit him like a brick wall. Ah, shit, it still smells like someone died in here, Charlie called out, squinting his eyes. He used the front of his shirt and neck hole just to cover his mouth and nose. He had worn his favorite t-shirt, a black Ramones logo shirt he had read, "Hey ho, let's go," at the bottom. Walking in, his heart raced as he scanned the room, his left hand on the doorknob, this right hand tightly wrapped around the shank held in the stabbing universe grip position. He inhaled and exhaled deeply just to try to calm his nerves. He nervously began to taunt. Old broken bones, Pete, I have a bone for you to break. Jason and Joey could hear him outside of them, began to laugh amongst each other, Jason punching Joey in the arm. Charlie could nearly feel his own heart begin pounding harder and harder. The story of Old Broken Bones Pete. It took place in 1906 in the small town of Little, Texas. There lived a black man named Pete Robertson. He lived with his family in a tiny room in a house that he built for them. It wasn't much, but it kept a roof over their heads and out of elements. There were 3 mattresses on the floor that were shared. One by Pete and his wife, Josephine, and one shared by their 12-year-old daughter, Mabel, and his youngest son, Jeremiah. Free and his other 2 sons, Joel 4 and Willie 8. He was very happy to be a husband in love, a father of a lovely girl and 3 strong boys. Pete scratched out a living as field worker, picking up whatever crop was in season and doing its jobs around town when it was work to be done, if he was lucky enough to land it. Of course, he had to accept wages lower than what the white man would accept. There was always been a prejudice of his own style of level. However, back in the old days, the South in general was prejudiced. Pete and his family got a little respect from the townspeople, with the exception of his boss and fellow workers, who luckily were Mexican, with a few whites every now and then. He got in some sort of bullshit from the white townsfolks while working in the fields. Pete was just a man trying to keep his family alive. Like many men in those times, sometimes they were all had a few vegetables or bread, but they were survived. But as life goes, we all have to suffer a little, and Pete was no exception. Little did he know how awful the plans that fate had in store for him. One night, some of the local clan wannabes still got liquored up and still decided to go pay Pete and his family a visit. When they arrived at his little home, they hollered and broke out windows with rocks and broke down the front door. It all happened so fast by the time Pete got up, warned his family, and went for his shotgun. The locals were already in the house. There were different versions of what exactly happened to Pete and his family. What the police found, everyone was dead. Josephine had been violated and expedited. All the children had also suffered the same fate. However, Pete's fate would have left heavy scars on his spirit. Pete had been beaten, his arms and legs were broken off by a heavy blunt object so he couldn't run or fight. As he lay helplessly on the floor in pain, he could watch the locals brutalize his entire family. Now imagine being in his shoes. Nothing like you could do but cry out and watch what is happening to your wife and little children. All we know, at some point, he was shot in the back by his own shotgun. Did he recognize his attackers? Well, we'll never know. All we do know is Pete suffered more than the man should have suffered, as well as his beloved family. Since the victims were different, no effort was made to find the perpetrators. No big investigation was ever brought men to justice. Lytle residents were shocked, not as the fact that was unspeakable crime happened to the family, but the cruelness and evil deeds were not that done. However, in 1958, a bed just before wasting away from lung cancer, he claimed that he and 5 other buddies, Johnny Traybone, Lewis Cartwright, Eddie Lynch, Jasper Cummings, and James Halt, had gotten drunk, went over to Pete Robertson's house, and killed him and his entire family. He did not mention anything about the violations and the extent of cruelty which was bestowed upon the family of Robinson. Perhaps Tom Phillips was trying to make amends with the Lord before departing this earth. Needless to say, their confession was never made past Tom's wife, Martha. She would keep it a secret and take it with her to the grave. She wouldn't allow the family's name, that ever prompted families in Lytle, to be tarnished. Although 3 of them named individuals had already died and no one left town not long after the incident. All vowed to keep the secret to grave. After all, Tom had been the mayor of Lytle and welcomed colored families into Lytle during his stint in politics. Legend has it that Pete's pain was ever so grateful the soul could not rest forever, is still forever doomed to remain on his place of death. It is said to those who curiously wanders in his house and shout, "Old broken bones, Pete, I have a bone for you to break," will have all their bones broken by Pete, and then he will take you under the house to be eaten alive by rats and insects, and all while you can do is do nothing but lay helpless while you're eaten alive. It is known that some children and teens of Lytles have disappeared without no trace. Some said they wandered into the house only to be pulled under the house and eaten alive by old Pete and company. But there have been reports of the foul smell of death emanating from the little house from the time to time. The city of Lytle never demolished it. Instead, it stands with a sign which reads, "Future Historical Restoration Project." The chart purposely of how much money was raised and how much more needed before the big restoration. The amount never changes. Anybody in Lytle, you ask, the reason why the old house was never demolished? They couldn't tell you. Nobody really knows. But one thing's certain. Every Halloween, there is a police officer parked in front of the house to keep mischievous teens out. Yes, sir, every town has his ghost story or urban legend. Charlie looked around the home, scared shitless. It seemed to be much larger once he was inside. He noticed 3 mattresses laying regularly on the floor. It seemed to be brownish-red stains on the middle of all 3. There was a rectangular wooden dinner table in the far left side of the corner, with an old-timey stove in the center line of the back wall. Rusted old iron pans lay on the floor ground near the stove. Dust was everywhere. The dreadful smell was coming from under the house, was in Charlie's nose. There has been a window near the front of the door and left to the side just before the dinner table. A few flies buzzed around, mostly around Charlie, occasionally buzzing around his ears, annoying him. It just felt like he was in a different time, like they had just visited Alamano or the missions in San Antonio on school field trips. He once saw the color purple and beloved with his mother and big sister had reminded him of that time in history. Being such a jumpy kid, he nervously awaited for something to happen. Anything. He was so on edge that a mouse fart would send him hightailing out the door. He waited for what seemed like forever. Meanwhile, outside, the two chickens were silent, tilting their ears towards the house, waiting for Charlie to come out, screaming for his mommy. Instead, they heard nothing but sounds of cicaras, which they called lacostes in Texas, in the trees. Suddenly, as everything made seem like it was okay, Charlie heard the two blood-curdling scream of a man, pain all round him. The screaming intensified as the man was suffering grew worse. He could not see the source of the screams, just the old stanchion innards of the raggedy old shack. It seemed like so real to Charlie. Could this actually be happening? His blood ran cold as he darted towards the door, screaming. The torment cries of the man did not ease. Instead, they grew louder. The cries and screams sounded like a man experiencing to be the worst pain imaginable. And to Charlie, this was more scarier than he ever been. More so than at the time at the mall with two scummy people. Outside, Jason and Joey heard Charlie screaming and running for the door, shouting, "Run!" But they could not hear the man crying out in pain. Suddenly, their blood ran cold as they were scared to the point of running, sprinting back down the dirt road, away from the old shack. Jason yelling at Joey, "Run! Come on!" as they bolted down towards town. They occasionally looked back to see if Charlie followed, but he never did. The two boys never waited for their new acquaintance. Instead, they both ran back to safety to Jason's house, totally obvious to the people out and about. Noticed the two young punks running through the small town. Out of breath, they finally arrived back at the door of Jason's blue two-storied house. "What the fuck happened to him?" asked Jason as he panted out of breath. He leaned against the side of the house, hands in front of his thighs, trying to regain his ability to speak clearly. Joey sat down on the ground next to the house, shook his head as he answered frantically, "I don't know! Do you think we should go back for him?" "Nah, he's okay. He probably just heard a cricket or something and got scared. We'll see him later." Joey stared at Jason with disbelief. "Dude, we just left him there. We're chickens for running and leaving him there. How would you feel like if someone did that to you?" "Whatever. If you want to go back yourself, go ahead. I'm going inside to eat. But don't say anything to anyone, alright?" Jason barked in response. Joey thought for a moment, and then nodded his head in agreement with his lifelong friend. "I'll text you later," Joey said calmly now. "Okay," answered Jason, as he got up and walked over to the steps that led up to the back door quickly and walked through, closing the door slightly hard behind him. Joey was feeling guilty about running off like a coward and leaving Charlie behind. Being new, Charlie just wanted someone to hang out with. At least all he could do was go back and check on the new kid, make sure he was alive. When he saw him, he would apologize for leaving him there. He would actually thought Charlie was cool, but this was Jason's idea to mess with him when he asked if there were any ghost stories in Lytle. Joey had always been creeped out by the old abandoned house that would never admit it to anyone. If he did, Jason would tease him about it. Why was Jason always acting such an asshole to people? His family was so nice. Once in a while, though, he was actually a cool guy. Joey walked back down the main street to the route to Robinson House. The sun was still at its peak from the afternoon sky, the hottest part of the day. Since he was overweight, Joey was sweating from every fold of his crevice. His red t-shirt showed the heavy sweat accumulating around his armpits, chest, back, and neck area. "Man, I'm going to get home once I'm done here. I'll just be okay." He thought about Charlie. "I don't want to get in trouble. It wasn't my idea." His mind was racing with all sorts of images of the monster arising from the darkest hour under old raggy shack just to get Charlie, breaking all of his bones one by one. His family, in his mind he could hear the bones snap, followed by Charlie screaming. When old Pete would drag Charlie's limp body back with him to the depths of where he waited with curious shrill seekers. He had imagined old broken bones Pete feasting on Charlie's flesh with the rats, roaches, ants, and every other insect in the area crawling around him, biting, eating, picking bones dry, all while he lay there screaming. Unable to move, He became even more scared the closer he got to the obnoxious shack. He had walked by it and hoped to stare at them many times. He was afraid to go inside. He imagined it was probably a sort of child monster predator takes kids to do what predators do. Pete's story was one that passed down from generation to generation, mostly through school kids. Usually the parents and longtime residents of Idle didn't speak of the story, although many had grown up with it, and their children had asked about it. They usually just brushed it off as a kid's story that had been told over hundreds of years in Lytle. Then it would tell to their kids to stay away from that place. Of course, what do their kids do when their parents tell them not to do something? Many of them would walk up to the dirt lot. A few of them even looked around the house. Even fewer went inside. The kids disappeared from that town, usually said to be kidnapped or runaways, although the speculation was led to the old Robinson house, where there were still whispers of speculation. Did some of them actually trespass into old Pete's house and taunt them by shouting those famous words? Some of the kids say that before this missing disappeared, one or two, they said they were going to go check out the old place. Others were never told by anyone what they were led up to, likely out of fear of getting a good ass whooping at home. That was what it was over the years. Sometimes after a person went missing, the smell of death was stronger than usual down at the part of the Robinson place. Always in their investigations, the police never found a thing. No body parts, no blood, clothes, no signs of life or indication that had been missing or been, much less died. There, just a foul smell of flies and other insects under the house. As Joey hesitantly arrived at this destination, he closely scanned off the area as the creepy-looking lot, even looking down the streets for the new kid. That rotten smell from underneath the house crept upon him as he stayed in one spot. He began to feel panic and nauseous when he saw there was no sign of him. "Charlie!" he yelled in his precocious voice. Nothing response, just a momentary silence of chikaras. He would have gotten closer to the house to search for Charlie, placing his hands over his mouth in universal hand megaphone. He shouted, "Charlie! It's Joey! Hey, I'm sorry we bailed on you like that, man. We just got scared when we heard you scream. Charlie, come out! We can go to my house and play Gears of War free." His pleas were unanswered. Last thing Joey wanted to do was go inside that house, have his bones broken, become food to old Pete, and insects were pushed away anyway. He knew it was just wrong to leave Charlie there to die, if he wasn't dead already. As he slowly made his way down the driveway, though, chubby as it seemed to be a small, innocent comparison to the place, like it would just be swallowing him whole, the whole shack seemed like to be watching him, waiting for the right moment to devour him, like it was going to say to him, "A little closer, just a little closer, come inside, we almost got you." Now he really felt like he was being watched. "Charlie, if you were hiding, I ain't scared." Joey's demeanor quickly turned from concerned to defensive. He was now yet in survival mode. He couldn't stop himself from walking up to the door. He saw the silent yellowjacket nest on the outer wall just to the right of him. He took care not to disturb it. Upon looking down at the doorknob, he noticed it was old and worn. He imagined Pete and his family placing their own hands on it to open and close behind them. Was this story of Pete and his family true? Had they ever lived for so long ago? Hesitating just to get open the door, Joey remembered Charlie picking up the pointed piece of wood off the ground, just holding it like a knife, ready to stab someone. He looked on the ground for a similar object, but only found a weathered piece of branch that he might be able to use to beat the shit out of someone with. He quickly walked up to the tent back of the porch steps, over to the branch about 12 feet away. Joey picked it up carefully, searching for any scorpions or any dangerous spiders resting under it. Nothing, just a fallen roly-polies slowly crawling down away from the spot. Joey brushed off the dirt from the stick, held it like a hammer, and made his way back up to the door intently. He decided that he would go pedal in the metal, balls out ready to face whatever dangers awaited him inside. Joey placed his hand on the fragile, rusty doorknob, inhaled and exhaled deeply. He then pulled the door open again and peeked inside his head, hiding behind the door. He scanned the innards of the shack that once housed the Robinson family. After the sign was clear, he stepped inside, making his way over to the middle of the room as he curiously looked around. He gagged from the smell emanating from under the house. It was so strong it stinged his nostrils. His heart racing so fast he could literally hear it. Suddenly he felt something crawling onto the back of his neck. He quickly slapped his neck, trying to kill whatever it was. He soon felt another crawling sensation up his back. He nervously slapped his face. Soon he had more crawling sensations. All over his face began slapping his face and yelling. He tried to use his t-shirt to wipe off whatever was crawling over him. By now, Joey was screaming and dancing around like a madman. Crawling out was in his mouth, nose, and ears. The biting everywhere was more than he could stand. When you're in a state of panic, you can't even think. He managed to see a light from the outside of the door. He remained screaming in pain as he bolted for the door. But as he did, it was slammed shut by unseen force. No, 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 no! He screamed, refusing to die. Although the door slammed shut, Joey didn't care. He slammed his body onto the door, unsuccessful at that busting though. He had turned around in his panic. He saw a tall black man in overalls hovering over him. The man let out a scream that would just be anyone else die of fright. When you hear about ghosts or local urban legends, it's best you stay away. Leave it alone. Don't go chasing the waterfalls. Because some things you don't want to be bothered. Let sleeping dogs lie. Friend, however, if you are someone near Little Texas, try asking around the old legend of Broken Bones Pete. People will scowl at you, walk away, or tell you it's just an old story, depending on who you ask. The old-timers wouldn't be so accommodating. Either way, it's real. It's a real legend. Just look it up yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you, though. When you find it, when you decide to approach that weary, dead old lot that was at that tiny, obnoxious house, where you'll find the buzzing sounds of insects under the house.